Greetings. The circumstances of a startling romance between a 90-year-old woman and a teenage boy are revealed in this episode. The connection would eventually take a sinister turn and result in gruesome murder. Come along as we examine the complexities of this surprising relationship and the terrible violence that caused it to fall apart. At the age of 19, Brock P. Dog Jameson had a big personality and lofty goals. He was employed as an assistant at the upscale retirement community Sunset Palms in Florida and Britain. Brock wasn't your typical employee. Many folks had soon come to admire him for his charm and charisma. In particular, one of his first and most important contacts at the center would be a woman named Helen Diddy Mathers. Helen, a 90-year-old former strip club owner, had operated clubs from Brooklyn to Atlantic City on the East Coast. One evening, they met in the community room at a muscular man gathering. Soon after being tasked with assisting with the event's planning, Brock's attention was drawn to Helen. He was drawn to her glitzy appearance and intriguing tales from her time stripping, and he ended up laughing and learning about her past with her for hours that night. Their bond grew rapidly. A vibrant assistant and a resident's cordial relationship quickly turned into a covert romantic and sexual relationship. Brock reminded Helen of the thrill and attention she had enjoyed in the past. In contrast, Brock's craving for a taste of luxury was fueled by Helen's kindness. She soon started giving him fine clothes, timepieces, and even modest amounts of cash, which Brock used to support his frequent drug use and vibrant nightlife. He used this relationship as a springboard to start having sex with other residents, both male and female, many of whom provided him with comparable incentives in return for their company and attention. Brock led a fast-pacing, high-risk lifestyle. He considered himself to be alive on the edge, a bad boy like the characters on his favorite reality shows, such as Keeping Up with the Kardashians and Vanderpump Rules. He believed that this position was his ticket to a career in entertainment. The attention he received from the senior citizens gave him a sense of importance, control, and excitement he had never had before. Brock's life was frequently chaotic, despite the outward glitz. From contacts he had made while clubbing in neighboring Tampa, he occasionally used a combination of cocaine, marijuana, and alcohol to fuel his nights. He was excited by his work in sexual relationships, but they had also occasionally made him feel empty. He frequently expressed his desire to become well-known and have his name displayed, but he was also burdened by his double existence. In a secret notebook, he started recording his experiences. He detailed the intimate lives of the residents and his relationships with them, hoping one day to use this material for a tell-all blog that he imagined would be his first claim to fame. It was unknown to Brock that his plans would soon put him in jeopardy. His connections, his way of life, and his dreams would all end tragically. A gruesome discovery was made by a cleaner at Sunset Palms retirement community on January 26, 2016 at approximately 8 in the morning. A 34-year-old employee who had worked at the retirement community for many years, Ava Bosco, was doing her morning rounds in the living suites. Anticipating that room 409 would be empty, she walked in. Rather, she discovered Brock P. Dog Jameson dead and covered in blood on the floor. Eva said she will always remember the scene. Brock was scribbled out, with deep cuts on his chest and eyes that seemed to have been inflicted with something sharp, later identified as a knitting needle. There was so much blood on the floor and other furnishings that it was obvious a bloody struggle had occurred. Ava was so frightened that she hurried out of the room and called for assistance from the staff members nearby. The facility's supervisor and a number of other assistants hurried to the scene and dialed 911 in a matter of minutes. The savagery of the incident astounded the paramedics and police who came shortly after. Standing outside, clearly terrified, Ava could hardly respond to their inquiries. In interviews, she later stated that at first she believed Brock's death to be a horrible accident. Many of the occupants were elderly, after all. Additionally, it was not unusual for a medical emergency or fall to be lethal. What she discovered in that room, however, was something out of a nightmare. It was a scene she was more familiar with from horror movies than from her day work at Sunset Palms. The occupants and staff were soon informed of the discovery. The managers of the retirement community initially informed the residents that Brock's death was caused by natural causes in order to avoid panic. However, this statement causes staff members to mumble and look at each other anxiously. Some residents felt that there was more to the story, even if the effort to keep it secret was made. In a matter of hours, Sunset Palms was a hive of gossip. Brock's passing had made the local headlines by that evening. Reporters from Bredington, which is nearby, and even Tampa began gathering outside the retirement home, hoping to catch a glimpse or get statements from staff or residents. Everyone was on edge as they wondered how someone could have brutally murdered such a young man and why it would occur in a quiet retirement community. A thorough investigation started as soon as the cops cleared the area. The morning of January 26, 2016, Bredington police quickly arrived at Sunset Palms retirement community. Detectives Jim Buntley and Teresa Giovanelli were in charge of the investigation. Known for her keen intuition and calm demeanor, Detective Giovanelli had worked on a number of well-known local cases. Her renowningly wealthy partner, Buntlevy, a former adult film star who had switched to law enforcement, was just as committed but took a more methodical approach, preferring to carefully and deliberately examine the evidence. The detectives entered room 409 and were met with a terrifying spectacle. Blood splattered the luxurious suite's soft carpeting and ornate walls, and the mess of furniture and other strewn objects showed evidence of a battle. Giovanelli found it especially unsettling that Brock Jameson's body was lying close to the bed, his eyes, chest, and even his genitalia displaying the horrifying injuries caused by a knitting needle. A broken bedroom lamp on the floor nearby added to the evidence of a violent altercation. The forensic team and investigators started a methodical examination of the suite. They carefully documented the blood patterns and object placements by taking pictures of the scene from every possible angle. Forensics checked the doorknobs, light, and furnishings for fingerprint, using tools such as magnetic powder and brushes. When attempting to piece together Brock's last minutes, every detail was vital. Giovanelli and Buntley then turned their attention to the weapon. Questions were raised right away because the knitting needle that had been discovered on the floor next to Brock's body looked like it had been used during the craft sessions that the inmates were allowed. The investigation became more complicated when Detective Buntley noted that this was not a common murder weapon. Why use something so exclusive to the retirement home? And who might be capable of such a heinous act? In order to learn more about who might have last seen Brock alive, the police interrogated the employees. No one noticed anything unusual, but a few residents claimed to have seen Brock the night before. To find out more about the killer's identity, forensic specialists gathered fiber and hair samples and swabbed for DNA. This was not going to be an easy case. Giovanelli and Buntley quietly agreed as they departed the scene that morning. The inquiry would need to go deeply into Brock's life as well as the lives of those who would have wanted him dead. In a community like Sunset Palms, where locals had their own secrets, histories, and ties to Brock. The 90-year-old inhabitant, Helen Diddy Mathers, was questioned by detectives Teresa Giovanelli and Jim Buntley to start their inquiry. Even in her senior years, Helen's relationship with Brock had begun innocently enough. Helen was a former strip club owner who was well known for her crass wit, riches, and ability to command attention. He frequently kept her company and assisted her with her everyday household chores. However, their relationship soon turned into a sexual one. Rich and used to getting her way, Helen lavished Brock with presents, including electronics and designer clothing. He offered her sex in exchange, which Helen loved. For a lady like Helen, Brock was an exciting secret and a link to her colorful past. When Brock promised her exclusivity, something Helen really cherished, The relationship quickly became exceptional. However, Brock was unable to control it, which made Helen envious. One night in early January, shortly after New Year's Day, the tension reached a breaking point. Helen had chosen to attend the pool area after taking a late stroll over Sunset Palms grounds. She was shocked and horrified to discover Brock and Wanda Robinson, her long-standing adversary, having sex in the pool while nude. After years of competing with Wanda, an 87-year-old jazz vocalist, Helen became deeply and uncontrollably angry upon witnessing her with Brock. Helen said in her police interview that the incident was heartbreaking and that it felt like a knife to her bleeding heart. The investigators observed her emotional reaction, observing as her carefully composed expression cracked while she described Brock's betrayal. She acknowledged that his infidelity, particularly with someone like Wanda, whom she perceived as undeserving and cunning, had caused her to feel envious, enraged, and extremely upset. Helen was clearly moved by the revelation of Brock's adultery, despite her best efforts to keep her pride intact. Helen was questioned further by detectives Giovanelli and Buntley regarding her whereabouts on the night of Brock's death. Helen claimed to have been by herself in her apartment, using her laptop to watch pornographic films and vape. She spoke in a bold but melancholy tone. Even though Helen was wealthy and had a strong personality, her age was evident when she answered their inquiries, her voice cracking sometimes. Helen's response to the straight question of whether she had any motive to hurt Brock was incisive. She answered, "I love that bleepin' boy. Oh, especially his giant bleep, even though I might have been bleeping angry. Ah, my hankle thoracic." In addition to noting her feelings, the detectives detected a faint hint of resentment in her voice. Helen was a prominent suspect in the case because of her possessiveness and fury over Brock's betrayal, even though she denied any involvement. Detectives Giovanelli and Buntley interviewed Helen before focusing on Wanda Jazz Robinson, the second main suspect in Brock's murder. The 87-year-old jazz vocalist Wanda had a colorful life and was well known for her free-spirited nature and extensive sexual history. Her rivalry with Helen, which persisted into her senior years, began as light-hearted sexual competition before developing into a full-fledged conflict. In Sunset Ponds, Wanda and Helen had earned a reputation for their sexual exploits throughout the years. With an unofficial competition to see who could have the most sexual partners among the inhabitants of the retirement complex, and, more often than not, the younger staff. Each took satisfaction in their ability to force others into having sex with them. It was evident to both ladies that they were not constrained by conventional notions of sexual relationships, to the pleasure and occasionally dismay of people at home. They instead freely pursued brief sexual relationships with both men and women, much like the products of the free love era of the 1960s. When Brock entered the picture, their antagonism intensified. To Helen's dismay, Wanda soon joined his numerous sexual partners after being seduced by his charm and youthful vigor. Helen's jealousy, however, didn't affect Wanda, who relished the drama it created between her and Helen and the excitement of being Brock's secret lover. Wanda was remarkably candid and occasionally even laughed when detectives sat down to question her. She acknowledged that she had only had a few flings with Brock and that their sexual relationship had been nothing more than a passing fancy. "My bleep was bleaked by him. I occasionally bleaked his," and she told the police. But when she talked about her health, her tone shifted. Wanda acknowledged that she had been caught up in the consequences of years of living a high-risk lifestyle, particularly her severe promiscuity. She shrugged casually and explained that her body wasn't what it used to be, saying, "I'm dying of STDs." She explained that she had lately been diagnosed with several STDs, which had significantly compromised her health, according to her doctors. The detective took notice of this detail. Wanda noted that she hardly had the physical power or endurance to carry out such a severe deed, considering her state. "These days, I can't even open a bleeping pickle jar, much less stab someone in the eye." She made a joke. Her nonchalant, unapologetic demeanor demonstrated that she felt neither guilty nor envious enough to harm Brock, and her disclosure of her health issues bolstered her claim of innocence. Wanda had a good alibi, too. She had been viewing an adult film on the Playboy network with the companion in an adjacent suite the night of Brock's death. She sadly acknowledged that it didn't turn her on. Wanda's candid confessions and her unrestrained rivalry with Helen added another level of drama to the investigation, but detectives took note of her alibi and ruled her out as an unlikely possibility. Wanda acknowledged that she was far from perfect, but she made it clear that no matter how intense her rivalry with Helen had been, her health issues alone would keep her from acting violently. Police discovered a startling turn of events a few days into the inquiry that fundamentally altered the course of the case. Detective Giovanelli discovered a notebook under the mattress while looking through Brock's room for any missed hints. At first glance, the simple leather-bound journal seemed unremarkable, but it contained information that helped detectives understand Brock's complicated life at Sunset Palms. As Giovanelli turned the pages, he saw that Brock had been meticulously documenting his sexual encounters with at least 24 senior citizens, both male and female, recording personal information regarding every affair, explicit accounts of sexual encounters, his assessments of each partner's character and sexual prowess, and, most importantly, notes regarding their financial situation were all included in the notebook. Brock categorized each lover's money and the ways in which he might profit from it, as if these relationships were a game. Brock's aspirations to make his scandalous life into a tell-all blog were also disclosed in the notebook. He had drafted blog post outlines about the sex lives of rich retirees, whom he called by thinly disguised monikers. He talked about starting a blog to reveal Sunset Palms' secrets, focusing on Wanda Robinson and Helen Mathers in particular. A week prior to his passing, Brock wrote about the gold mine he was sitting on in one post, expecting that the blog would gain popularity and result in offers from magazines or television. He suggested publications that he believed would be interested in purchasing his tale, such as Inside Edition and TNZ. It became evident from the twist that charm and attractiveness were not the main factors in Brock's relationships. They were part of a well-thought-out scheme. Detectives Giovanelli and Buntley discovered that Brock had planned to release his blog shortly, which might have caused some of the affluent people to feel extremely uncomfortable. The notion that someone wished to keep this information hidden provided a new focus for the investigation when his plans were discovered. After discovering the notebook, both detectives decided that given the compelling possibility of a murderous motive, they needed to investigate Helen and Wanda's relationship with Brock further. Additionally, they added staff members and other residents who might have been afraid of Brock's blog exposing them to the public to their list of possible suspects. Residents of Sunset Palm responded with alarm and paranoia as word of the discovery discreetly made its way throughout the hamlet. The already stressful environment at the institution was heightened by staff and residents' concerns about whether they may be mentioned in Brock's notebook. Detectives were able to better comprehend Brock's motivations and gain a roadmap to his social life thanks to the journal. And some who may have wished to keep him quiet. The investigation's momentum was changed by the fresh evidence. Given Brock's propensity to reveal private material for his own benefit, investigators now concentrated on determining who was aware of his blog and may have sought to shut it down. The 52-year-old Sunset Palms manager, Nigel O'Keefe, was well known in the retirement community for his refined British accent, custom suits, and charming demeanor. However, Nigel was concealing a sinister and perverse truth beneath that elegant facade. Nigel, who was born in Coventry, England, had experience running upscale retirement communities for the rich. However, he had been engaged in a tremendously profitable but highly dubious side company back home. In order to sell the tape to Japan, where unusually pornographic content featuring old white women is highly popular, Nigel surreptitiously recorded the residents' private sexual relations. Nigel recognized a new possibility at Sunset Ponds when he arrived in the United States. He was aware that the affluent residents of the posh retirement community led fascinating, frequently daring lifestyles. He started a covert plan, akin to his previous activities in England, after spotting an unexplored market. By setting up hidden cameras in some of the private suites and con areas, he captured sexual moments that the residents had no idea were being recorded. However, Nigel wasn't content with merely setting up covert cameras. By establishing an atmosphere that would promote the wanton sexual activity he wished to document, he went one step further. He purposefully chose young, attractive aides, looking for people who were naturally able to connect with the older inhabitants and had charm and charisma. Rock Jameson was the kind of worker Nigel wanted on his staff because of his laid-back demeanor, attractive appearance, and flirty personality. Nigel was aware that the older women at Sunset Palms, as well as possibly some of the males, would be drawn to Brock's charm. Nigel gradually pushed Brock and other assistants to have sex with as many residents as they could. He never specifically instructed them to begin romantic or sexual connections with them, but he was aware that Brock's disposition and way of life would probably suggest so. Nigel deliberately arranged circumstances to improve the likelihood of intimate sexual interactions that he could document by giving Brock and others this opportunity. Nigel refrained from meddling too much in the lives of his employees or residents in order to maintain the efficiency of his plan. He kept an eye on things from a distance to ensure that the relationships grew organically. He also took great care to hide his tracks, hiding the cameras, encrypting his files, and placing them on a distant server that was hard to find. He never specifically instructed them to begin romantic or sexual connections with them, but he was aware that Brock's disposition and way of life would probably suggest so. Nigel deliberately arranged circumstances to improve the likelihood of intimate sexual interactions that he could document by giving Brock and others this opportunity. Nigel refrained from meddling too much in the lives of his employees or residents in order to maintain the efficiency of his plan. He kept an eye on things from a distance to ensure that the relationships grew organically. He also took great care to hide his tracks, hiding the cameras, encrypting his files, and placing them on a distant server that was hard to find. He sent the tapes to certain connections in Japan, who would then play them for the country's large paying audience. Nigel had amassed a little fortune through these predatory methods, and his firm was profitable. But as investigators looked more closely into Brock's death, Nigel's plans started to fall apart. Detective Giovanelli found it strange that one of the younger aides during the investigation had said that Nigel had always been particularly interested in the sexual interactions between residents and staff. Suspicion was immediately aroused when investigators discovered a hidden camera in one of the private suites. At first, Nigel avoided inquiries regarding his actions and denied any role in Brock's killing while they interrogated him. Nigel attempted to minimize the covert cameras as security precautions when questioned further. However, his justification was not convincing. Detectives became increasingly certain that Nigel's complex plan could be connected to Brock's death, particularly if Nagel believed his trade secrets and profitable enterprise were in danger of being revealed. They now viewed Nigel as a possible suspect with grave intentions, especially if he had discovered Brock's plans to publish a tell-all blog. Nigel became increasingly defensive and furious as he realized he was being closely watched. Increasing the suspicion of detectives, following weeks of stress, Helen Mathers made the decision to put an end to the unrest on her own terms in January 2016. Feeling as though she had no other option, she meticulously planned Brock's killing while being consumed by a poisonous mixture of jealousy and rage. She had been embarrassed by Brock's repeated affairs and his adulterous meeting with Wanda Robinson in the community pool, and every time she saw him with someone else, her emotions flared. Helen was motivated by a desire to regain the authority she believed had been taken from her and felt deceived by his lies. Helen's feelings on the night of the murder were a tumultuous mixture of grief, rage, and an odd serenity. She pretended to want sex with Brock in order to entice him to her place, but there was a secret agenda behind her remarks. Feeling as though she had no other option, she meticulously planned Brock's killing while being consumed by a poisonous mixture of jealousy and rage. She had been embarrassed by Brock's repeated affairs and his adulterous meeting with Wanda Robinson in the community pool, and every time she saw him with someone else, her emotions flared. Helen was motivated by a desire to regain the authority she believed had been taken from her and felt deceived by his lies. Helen's feelings on the night of the murder were a tumultuous mixture of grief, rage, and an odd serenity. She pretended to want sex with Brock in order to entice him to her place, but there was a secret agenda behind her remarks. She stole a knitting needle from her bag while he reclined comfortably in her living room, perhaps anticipating a wild night of drugs and sex. She stabbed Brock madly in the eyes, chest, and genitalia before he even understood what she was doing. Helen attempted to go about her daily life in the days after Brock's death, but she became more and more nervous as the police stepped up their investigation. Her hands shaking, she watched TV broadcasts about Brock's murder, where authorities were interrogating other residents. As gossip spread about Sunset Ponds, she became increasingly uneasy and found it difficult to conceal her guilt. When detectives came across Brock's recent blog drafts, they started to focus on Helen. Brock had alluded to Helen's jealousy and possessiveness in one article, painting a clear picture of a fraught relationship. Suspicion was also immediately aroused by the fact that security tape showed Brock entering Helen's room the night of the murder, but never leaving. Detectives called Helen in for interrogation as the evidence grew. After hours of intense questioning, Helen finally lost it and admitted to the crime. As she spoke, the weight of what she had done seemed to crush her. She confessed to killing Brock, her face pallid and her words hardly audible above a whisper. Helen felt vulnerable, empty, and embarrassed after her first sense of power had vanished. Sunset Ponds was filled with shock and rumors following Helen's imprisonment. She felt the weight of her actions bearing down on her as the police released her in handcuffs. Her life irrevocably changed by the violent decisions she had taken that evening. In her audacious and unorthodox murder trial defense in January 2017, Helen Mathers asserted that Brock's death was ultimately caused by society's condemnation of her sexual freedom. Through her attorney, Denise Dunker-Callahan, Helen made what is known as the promiscuous woman defense, claiming that years of social pressure and the stigmatization of her private life had pushed her over the edge. Helen depicted a culture that disapproves of older women who explore their sexuality, implying that this dormant animosity pushed her into a precarious situation and led to the terrible circumstances that resulted in Brock's murder. Throughout the trial, Helen explained how her relationships, especially her passionate affair with Brock, a man who was almost 70 years younger than her, were despised by the retirement society and even her family. She stressed that the sense that everyone was waiting for her to fail added to her jealousy of Brock's extramarital affairs. Her defense team argued that she acted in desperation because of the poisonous atmosphere caused by society's long-standing condemnation of women like Helen. However, prosecutor Roger Fields vigorously contested this defense. Fields maintained that jealousy and possessiveness, not peer pressure, were the true motivations for Helen's behavior. Helen was portrayed by the prosecutor as someone who felt entitled to dominate Brock and then reacted violently when she was unable to do so. Fields called witnesses from Sunset Palms who described Helen's tendency toward possessiveness and her frequent arguments with other neighbors over Brock. Fields maintained that Helen was the only one responsible for Brock's death, citing surveillance footage and Brock's own internet posts to highlight the shakiness of their connection. The jury spent 3 days deliberating. In the end, they didn't believe Helen's defense of the promiscuous lady, because they thought it was an attempt to shift the blame. Helen was convicted of second-degree murder on January 28, 2017. Helen sat with her hands folded in her lap and a blank expression on her face while the verdict was read. She appeared aloof, as though she had already accepted her fate. Helen was given a 25-year prison sentence without the chance of release after sentencing, guaranteeing that she would be incarcerated for the rest of her life. The judge made it apparent that Helen's decisions, not cultural prejudices, were ultimately to blame, notwithstanding her defensive tactics. Helen looked exhausted and defeated as she was escorted out of the courthouse in handcuffs, the consequences of her actions clearly crushing her. The sentencing was a final, irrevocable conclusion for Helen. She was left to deal with the fallout from her actions alone when her attempt to place the blame on social prejudice failed. The history of the Sunset Palms murder case was shaped by the unfortunate or unexpected turns that Helen Groves, Wanda Robinson, and Nigel Campbell's lives took following the trial in January 2017. One narrative appeared to come to an end with Brock Jamison's murder trial, but the fallout revealed another. Following the trial, Wanda Robinson, one of Sunset Palms' most well-known residents, experienced severe health issues. Wanda, who was notorious for being quite promiscuous, acknowledged in court that she had several E. coli infections. She had been gradually deteriorating due to these illnesses, and within months of the trial's end, Wanda's health had drastically declined. Due to complications from her ailments, Wanda passed away in early April of 2017. The vibrant woman who had long played a major role in the underground plays of the town came to a tragic conclusion with her death. Later, Sunset Palms residents remembered her as a controversial and lagly figure by hosting a tiny memorial service. Helen Groves found incarceration to be tough and lonely. Helen, who was already facing a lengthy sentence at her senior age, found it difficult to adapt to her new life in prison. The COVID-19 outbreak then hit her facility in early 2020, infecting several prisoners. Helen, who was already in poor health, got infected with the virus and couldn't get better. Her name was added to the list of pandemic casualties in the nation's jail systems after she died in her cell in April 2020. The last chapter of Helen's life came to an end with her passing, characterized by controversy and the untimely demise of her romance with Brock. Nigel Campbell's destiny, however, took a surprising turn. Legal loopholes kept him from being charged with a major crime, despite the fact that his exploitative and voyeuristic operation at Sunset Palms was uncovered. Free from prosecution, Nigel became a little celebrity in Japan's adult film industry, but did not come home. His unusual approach to adult media and the incidents surrounding his recordings at Sunset Palms attracted international attention. Nigel swiftly rose to prominence in the Japanese adult film industry as a minor but notorious personality, producing and directing films that purportedly honored his Florida adventures. Despite the controversy surrounding his popularity, it gave him a following and financial stability. Wanda, Helen, and Nigel's eventual outcomes reveal a tale that started with envy and betrayal and ended with surprising consequences. Each of them had a complex legacy that was interwoven with the Sunset Pond controversy. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. See you on the next story.